Now, Ben Swann is an old colleague of mine. He's a considerable financial expert with an acute political brain too. He's the founder and CEO of Sovereign Media, and it's a pleasure to welcome him on to the mother of all talk shows. Ben, very good to see you again. There's so much to talk about, but can we start with this Ponzi scheme that has collapsed?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate kind of the context you were giving people in the beginning. You know, FTX, and you mentioned that I know a lot about financial issues, more specifically to your audience, if you don't know who I am, crypto issues. And I've talked about crypto for many years. I was one of the early people into Bitcoin and have followed cryptocurrency and covered it for a long time. And what's important for people to understand is that FTX is the exact opposite of everything that crypto was about, and something that I had actually warned about many, many times long before this scandal, is the idea that a company like FTX is completely centralized, as opposed to the initial mission of cryptocurrency, which is to be decentralized. I've warned people for years, don't put your money into an exchange where it sits in a wallet that's controlled by a centralized exchange. Why? The reason for that, George, is because that's not your wallet. It's their wallet. In this case, it is Sam Bankman-Fried's wallet, and he treated it like it was his wallet. He took money out of other people's wallets, acting like it was no big deal. You're right when you say he acted like a bank. Like banks do this all the time. The difference is that banks are federally insured to make sure that if there is some kind of misuse of funds or malfeasance, then there is a federal insurance program that will kick in to make you whole up to $250,000. That doesn't exist in the crypto world. And so what you had was a guy who was literally stealing from his own customers, taking money directly out of what they thought were their wallets. It was really his wallet because he had all the control over it. And then he was doing something else. He was not only spending it, but he was pledging his money to go to great causes. He was, as you mentioned, giving over $40 million to Democratic candidates, and he had been green-lighted by the FTC in the United States, the Federal Trade Commission, to protect himself. He had given money to all the right people so that they wouldn't come looking. And now, all of a sudden, we have a big push for we need strict regulations for the crypto industry. And not one single regulation that's being talked about right now, I would tell you, will do anything to prevent what just happened. Instead, they want to restrict things like privacy coins. They want to restrict the ability of you to keep your own wallet because you're not smart enough to, and instead allow someone like SBF, as he's known, to be the person who gets to control those wallets. So it is a scandal on so many different levels. That's, of course, without all the other issues regarding Ukraine and how that all worked out. So many scandals tied up in this particular issue. But I'll tell you, George, how you would have known that this guy was a fraud in the fact that he was a media darling. No one in the media wanted to question him or take a serious look at him. They treated him like he was a genius when, in fact, he's just a crook.
Yeah, the New York Times is still puff-piecing him, even though he's in handcuffs in the Bahamas and 5 million people have lost their money, whilst, Julian Assange is in a dungeon. It's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. And it's unbelievable when you can sit back and pretend that someone like SBF, right, is some kind of wizard in terms of his great intelligence and financial acumen. He's been referred to as the next Warren Buffett. He was referred to, I believe, by Jim Cramer as being the next JP Morgan. He was going to redefine finance. The guy was just a thief. And he acted like a thief. He took people's money. He bought a sponsorship in Miami of the Miami Heat Stadium. It's FTX Arena. You know, he put his name on lots of things to make himself seem like he was important and make himself seem like he was legitimate. And again, the media treated him great, when in fact, all he was doing was convincing people to put their money into wallets that he had access to, and he was taking that money directly out of their wallets. It's the most despicable thing that I think anyone could really think of in terms of a financial person and how they would behave. And yet, as you said, there still are puff pieces being written even today about him.
Shouldn't the Democrats give that 40 million back to the people from whom it was stolen?
Of course, but that won't happen. What will happen is small increments, $2,500 here, $1,000 there, will be given to charities. That's what they always say, right? Is that we can't really return it to those people. So instead, we'll just donate it to charity, as if donating to some charity that has nothing to do with the person who was robbed is somehow making up for the fact that this individual was robbed. And so that's already happening. There are a few politicians who have said, we'll make donations in kind of this money to a charity, but that doesn't make whole the person who has been wronged here.
No, absolutely. Now, turning to the broader political situation, I read a very profound observation just a half hour ago. It said that the establishment is losing its control over soft power, and that therefore it will use hard power more and more often. And whilst they can still rely on some of the soft power big tech agencies, they can no longer rely on all of them. Twitter, for example, they have now effectively non-personed Elon Musk as a precursor to declaring him an enemy of the state. They are crying into their man bags and tearing out their man buns amongst the commentariat on the West Coast because they've lost their power at Twitter. And so what's going to happen on the whole freedom of speech front, Ben? Because you and I are, in a way, we're fighters on that frontier, aren't we?
Without question. And I think what we're going to see is that whenever we talk about speech, right, speech is such a critical issue because it is the single antidote to authoritarianism. The only true antidote to authoritarianism is speech, the ability to stand up and to refute what's happening around you and to say what I see with my own eyes and what I tell you with my own words, right, has the power to influence and to sway. You used the term soft power a minute ago. The ultimate soft power is the ability to persuade, the ability of persuasion through conversation, through debate, through discussion. It can't be allowed and it can't be tolerated. And so when we watch the G20 summit that's going on right now, and Klaus Schwab, why is he at the G20 summit? Why is he allowed to speak there? He's been elected by no one. No one's cast a vote for him, and yet he's standing up telling the world how, once again, they're going to reset the world, this great reset that he keeps calling for. The way you resist that is through speech. Well, that can't be allowed. It's why fact checkers exist. They exist for the sole purpose of silencing dissent. Social media companies employ them for the sole purpose of silencing dissent. And so what you said about hard power, absolutely, that I think is the next step. The question will be, what tools will citizens in their own countries be able to employ in order to be able to create structures that are protected against that hard power? It's what we're doing through Sovereign.media. The whole concept of our media company is that it is blockchain based, utilizing these tools that we talked about a minute ago for cryptocurrency, utilizing those same tools to protect speech and to allow people to speak freely without governments being able to intervene and control that. This concept of social media companies being almost their own quasi-governments that have their own rules about what is acceptable and what is not, it's simply unacceptable. But it has been going on for so long that a lot of the population has begun to kind of cede that ground and decide that, you know what, it's okay that they decide that they can control all public discourse and all dialogue. It's simply not acceptable.
No, and of course, we know that in the Hunter Biden laptop case, that all agencies of the government were deployed ruthlessly to suppress a truth. It was true that the laptop existed, and it was true what was alleged to have been on it, though I suspect we've only seen the tip of that iceberg. And yet, 50 American intelligence officers were deployed as named and pictured individuals to declare it as Russian disinformation. The New York Times and the mainstream televisions all declared it not just false, but Russian disinformation. They mobilized every sinew of their strength because they knew that what was on Hunter's laptop might cost the big guy the presidency and might see Donald Trump re-elected. And so they mobilized an army of liars. How can we stop them doing that again, Ben?
Well, one thing we have to do is stop allowing that army of liars to come back and to be treated as if they are legitimate in the things that they say. You mentioned there were 50 national security, former, heads of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, who got up and essentially put their name on a letter saying this laptop story is Russian disinformation. It is not true. They knew that was not the case. The FBI had that laptop in their possession a year before that letter was written. They absolutely knew that it was real. All they had to do was open it up and look inside. There was no question it was real, because every time that Hunter Biden seems to decide he wants to be with a prostitute, he puts 4 cameras on his head and he records the whole thing, right? So there was no doubt that this was a legitimate laptop that legitimately belonged to him. It was filled with his emails and private messages. So here's part of the problem. Part of the problem is that we allow the same people to come back over and over without having, stood up and admitted faults, admitted that they were wrong. If you cannot admit that you were not only wrong, but you were dishonest when you were talking about Hunter Biden, you can't talk about anything else. At what point do we as the public say, no, we're not going to continue to play this game? Now, right now we allow it to happen because somebody can go on CNN or Fox News and they can be wrong. They can say something that's entirely discredited, and there's no consequence for that. There's no consequence for their lies or their ineptitude. Either one, whether they're intentionally malicious or they're just a fool, there's no consequence for that. And so we have to no longer allow that as the public. The other thing is we have to build parallel economies for information, parallel economies for sharing information, because listen, freedom of speech means that there's going to be some bad information out there and incorrect information out there. But when you find someone within the world, right, who is consistently accurate in the things that they're saying, how do we amplify those voices? And that's another thing that we're trying to do to the platform we've built, is amplify voices that are consistently correct in the things that they are saying. How do you know if someone is honest? Well, just look at what they've said in the past and measure up whether or not the things they have said, the comments that they have made, their reporting has been proven to be accurate or not. You don't have to go back very far to figure this out, especially when we're talking about all the inaccuracies right now. Go back 6 months and 90% of the people who are allowed to appear on cable news or who are never censored on social media are consistently wrong in the things that they say, consistently wrong. And yet they're allowed to continue to have those positions in society, in the public square, where they're allowed to continue to speak. So I think as a public, we have to become much better about discrediting those people and refusing to give credence to their words, regardless of what their title might have been in the past.
Finally, and I'm grateful for your time, Ben, Donald Trump is off and running. What are his chances, do you think, first of being the nominee, and second of defeating, by then, the 95-year-old Joe Biden, or at least he'll look 95?
Well, let's say this. Let me answer the second part first. If he gets through the primary and becomes the nominee, what are his chances? Well, if voting machines will actually work and it doesn't take a week to count the vote afterwards, I think his chances are very good. I watched his speech, his announcement speech, and one of the things he mentioned, which I think is absolutely accurate, is the fact that gas prices have already been at record levels in the United States. They came down just before the election, within the 6 months before the election, because Biden depleted the petroleum reserve, the strategic petroleum reserve here in the U.S., and he depleted it in order to bring them down before the election. They'll skyrocket once again. There's a lot of people who are feeling an awful lot of pain. Inflation very, very high. It's only going to get worse. So I think that if we get to a general election, another rematch of Biden and Trump, and if we actually have a level playing field in terms of voting, I think that Trump would ultimately prevail in that. I think anyone who runs against Biden would ultimately prevail in that. Having said that, will Trump get to that general election? And the question is, will he be primary? There's a lot of talk about Ron DeSantis, as you mentioned in the lead up, and whether or not he'll be the guy to take him on. DeSantis has been asked about this, and he told people to calm down, stop talking about it so much, because I think he's kind of figuring out what he wants to do. There's a lot of money that wants DeSantis to run, a lot of support within the Republican Party. They see him as the guy who can beat Biden, and they see him as a better, more palatable candidate for the electorate as a whole. The problem is this. Running in a primary against Donald Trump, Trump likes to punch. And so, DeSantis may want to punch back, but you come out of a primary pretty bruised, even if you survive it against him. And that's not saying he necessarily would. Trump got a lot of criticism because he put out a tweet immediately after the election that said, can we talk about the fact that in 2020, that Trump got 1.1 million more votes in Florida than DeSantis just did in his historic win. The numbers are what the numbers are. And so it's kind of hard to argue with that. Trump has a lot of support. I think a primary would get pretty ugly. So exactly how would it play out? I don't know, but it will be interesting to watch and see.
Ben, how do people follow your work? Tell us about Sovereign Media, how we can get on it.
Sovereign.media, SOVREN.media, not .com, .media is our platform. And George, by the way, we just love to invite you to bring the mother of all talk shows over to Sovereign and have your own channel there and where people can see it. Our goal is to create, again, a vibrant environment for great content that won't be censored. We're blockchain based. It can't be censored or taken down, and we have truly decentralized servers all across the world so that it can't come down. So we invite you to come and all of your audience to check it out, sovereign.media.
It's a deal. Ben Swann, a pleasure, as always, to see you and talk to you. Thanks very much for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.